Evelyn Maris thought she was chasing beauty through the Canadian wilderness, but Detective Jonas Harker would soon discover she had stumbled into something far darker. Behind her lens waited a predator, a silent watcher who turned her passion for nature into a path toward her own death. Calder Riven's forgotten cabin, Darren Cole's trusted smile, and the endless whisper of the pines would all reveal one terrifying truth. In Riverdale Creek, it wasn't the wilderness people should have feared, it was the man hiding inside it. Evelyn Maris was known across Riverdale Creek for her calm spirit and deep connection to nature. She often wandered into the wild with her camera, capturing frozen lakes, deer moving through mist, and the quiet charm of isolation. Her social media pages were filled with untouched Canadian beauty, earning her a modest but loyal following. On the morning of February 3rd, she set out before sunrise, telling friends she was headed toward the North Ridge to photograph migrating wolves. It was a typical trip for her until she never returned, when her Jeep was found abandoned near the frozen creek later that evening. The town's peaceful rhythm broke apart. The driver's door hung open, and her tripod stood half buried in snow inside the vehicle. Her thermos of coffee was still warm, and her phone had no signal. Tracks led away from the Jeep toward the forest, but they ended abruptly near the icy water. It looked as though she had vanished mid-step. Investigators from the Riverdale Police Department arrived within hours, led by Detective Jonas Harker, a quiet man who'd solved several missing person cases in the region. Yet even he felt something was off about this one. Jonas studied the scene carefully. There were no signs of a struggle, no broken branches or scattered items to suggest panic. The stillness of the place made it almost haunting. He wondered why Evelyn had stopped there, far from her planned route. Her car's GPS showed no detour. It was as if something had drawn her to that spot deliberately. Locals who lived nearby said they heard the sound of an engine around 10 a.m., followed by silence. Some swore they saw a tall figure standing by the tree line. For days, search teams combed through the forest with dogs and drones. The area was dangerous, covered in deep snow and shifting ice, but they found nothing. No camera, no backpack, no trace of Evelyn. Then, almost a week later, a volunteer discovered her gloves hanging from a low branch nearly 3 miles from the Jeep. The strange part was that the gloves were dry and clean, as though someone had placed them there recently. Jonas grew uneasy. The placement of the gloves seemed deliberate, like a message or a warning. When drone footage from the search was reviewed, something caught his attention. In one frame, near the background, a tall dark figure stood motionless at the edge of the woods, watching the rescue team. Its face was obscured by a hood or mask, and it didn't move even as people passed close by. No one on the ground had noticed it at the time. Evelyn Maris's disappearance became the most haunting mystery Riverdale Creek had ever seen. The forest, once a place of beauty, turned into a symbol of dread. Jonas Harker knew deep down that Evelyn hadn't simply wandered off or fallen into the ice. Someone had been there that morning, someone who knew how to disappear just as easily as she did. And now, he feared that someone was still out there, watching from the shadows of the endless Canadian wilderness. The discovery of the hidden cabin changed everything about the case. 2 hikers had been following an old trapper's trail when they stumbled across the structure, half buried beneath snow and pine needles. From the outside, it looked abandoned, its roof sagging. The chimney collapsed, the windows boarded up. But inside, the air was thick with the smell of oil and damp wood, and what they found on the walls froze them where they stood. Dozens of photographs were pinned across every surface, overlapping each other like a collage of secrets. Every photo showed someone from Riverdale Creek, grocery clerks, teachers, children waiting for the school bus, even Detective Jonas Harker himself, all taken from a distance, all without anyone knowing. The police sealed off the area immediately. As Jonas walked through the cabin, flashlight in hand, the weight of what he saw settled like ice in his chest. Some photos were printed on glossy paper, while others were still developing in chemical trays, suggesting someone had been there recently. A half-empty mug of coffee sat on a dusty counter, and the ashes in the stove were still warm. Whoever had lived there had only just left. Pinned in the center of the wall was a large photograph of Evelyn Maris, taken from outside her living room window. The timestamp on the image was just 7 days before she vanished. That was the moment Jonas realized Evelyn hadn't been a random victim of the wilderness. She had been watched, followed, and possibly hunted. In a drawer beside the bed, officers found a faded driver's license belonging to Calder Riven, a reclusive landscape painter who had disappeared 3 years earlier after a suspicious house fire. People in Riverdale Creek remembered him as quiet but strange, a man who painted endless portraits of forests and abandoned cabins. After the fire that destroyed his home and studio, no one had seen him again. Until now, his name had been forgotten. The cabin revealed more than anyone expected. Under a worn-out rug, a trapdoor led to a narrow staircase descending into the frozen earth. The space below was dim, lit only by a flickering bulb. On a table lay Evelyn's missing camera. Its lens was cracked, but the memory card was still inside. When investigators examined the footage, it showed shaky clips of trees, snow, and distant shapes, but one final clip stood out. It was recorded on the day she vanished. The camera caught a man, standing among the trees, his face hidden by a hood, staring directly into the lens. Then the camera jerked violently, and the recording ended. The evidence pointed toward Calder Riven, but the clues didn't quite fit. There was food stocked on the shelves that hadn't expired, batteries that were recently charged, and modern tools. Someone had been living there, yes, but perhaps not Calder. Maybe the cabin had changed hands. Jonas couldn't shake the thought that the real occupant was still nearby, watching the police from the forest, the same way he had watched Evelyn. When night fell, snow began to drift over the roof again, burying the cabin deeper into the woods. The town of Riverdale Creek tried to rest, but few could sleep. The discovery had turned a missing persons case into something much darker. The first trace of a hidden predator who might have been among them all along. The discovery of Calder Riven's journal deepened the mystery even further. It was found frozen inside a buried backpack near a riverbed several miles from the cabin. The notebook was stiff with ice, its pages soaked and fragile, but forensic experts managed to separate and dry a few of them. What they uncovered was disturbing. Calder's words hinted at madness, fear, and something unseen that haunted him long before his disappearance. Most entries were rambling thoughts about shadows in the forest and the sense of being watched. But one entry stood out clearly, written in shaky handwriting. "The watchers are real. They live between the trees. The woman saw one of them." Detective Jonas Harker read those lines over and over, unsure if they were the product of paranoia or a desperate warning. Calder had written about hearing footsteps outside his cabin at night and finding strange symbols carved into nearby trees. He mentioned that someone or something was marking the woods long before Evelyn Maris vanished. If his words were to be believed, there was an unseen network of observers hidden in the wilderness, always watching those who dared to enter. The journal wasn't the only evidence. Inside the backpack, investigators found a small metal charm shaped like an inverted triangle with a circle in its center. No one recognized the symbol, but within days, Jonas discovered something that made his blood run cold. When the previous missing persons files were reopened, photographs from one case showed the same symbol carved into a tree, near the site of a photographer's disappearance from 8 years earlier. Riverdale Creek had long been known for its untouched beauty, but the more Jonas uncovered, the clearer it became that the region had a dark history. 3 other photographers, Harold Dens, Mia Kelter, and Rowan Hale, had all gone missing within a 10-mile radius of where Evelyn disappeared. Each case had gone cold after winter storms erased any evidence. At the time, the police had assumed the victims were lost hikers or accident cases. Now, that seemed naive. The identical patterns, the proximity, and the strange symbols painted a chilling picture. The DNA analysis from the cabin and the backpack finally arrived. It confirmed something Jonas had feared. Traces of an unidentified male were present on both the camera and the journal. The same DNA also matched samples found on evidence from one of the earlier cold cases. It meant one man had been connected to multiple disappearances spanning nearly a decade. As the snow began to melt and the first signs of spring returned, new secrets emerged from beneath the ice. A local fisherman reported seeing something pale floating near a bend in the river. When authorities investigated, They found a severed human hand trapped beneath a sheet of melting ice. It was preserved almost perfectly, the skin still intact despite the freezing water. A silver ring gleamed faintly on one finger. Etched into it were the initials EM. The evidence was undeniable. Evelyn Maris was dead, but the way her hand had been found alone, placed almost deliberately near where Calder's journal surfaced, suggested something intentional. Jonas couldn't shake the thought that someone wanted him to find it, as if they were leaving a trail for him to follow. The pieces didn't form a complete picture yet, but one thing was certain: the killer was methodical, intelligent, and comfortable in the wilderness. Someone who knew every inch of the land and how to use it to hide their crimes. The mystery of Riverdale Creek had evolved from a missing person case into a horrifying pattern of ritualistic killings, and Jonas Harker was starting to realize that the hunter he was searching for might have been stalking him in return. The days following the discovery of Evelyn's hand brought a tense stillness over Riverdale Creek. Journalists filled the small town. Helicopters circled the frozen hills, and locals locked their doors before dusk. The forests that once represented peace now carried a reputation of dread. Every gust of wind through the pine trees felt like a whisper. Every shadow seemed to move. For Detective Jonas Harker, the case had crossed into something far more sinister than he had ever faced. The murders, the symbols, and the surveillance all hinted toward ritual or obsession. Whatever this was, it wasn't random violence. It was calculated, almost ceremonial. The breakthrough came unexpectedly when a wildlife hunter turned an emotion-triggered camera. He had set up to monitor wolves. Among the recordings, one video caught Jonas's attention. It was shot near the northern ridge, close to where the cabin was found. In the middle of the night, the infrared lens captured a hooded figure walking through the snow, dragging something large behind them. The object appeared wrapped in a tarp, heavy enough to leave deep tracks. Moments later, the figure stopped and looked directly into the camera before cutting the power cord. The timestamp was just 2 days before the fishermen discovered Evelyn's hand. A search team was dispatched to the area immediately. They followed the tracks captured in the video until they reached the base of the Whispering Hills, a place avoided even by hunters. The snow there was uneven, the ground soft beneath. When officers started digging, the shovel struck something solid. Beneath the ice lay 3 shallow graves lined in a rough circle. The bodies were so decomposed it took days to identify them. But dental records confirmed the worst. They were the missing photographers from years past: Harold Denz, Mia Kelter, and Rowan Hale. Each body bore the same mark carved into the forearm, the inverted triangle with a circle at its center, identical to the charm found in Calder Riven's backpack. Jonas realized the killer had a ritual. The victims were not chosen randomly. All were photographers. All had ventured deep into the forest, and all had unknowingly entered the killer's domain. Whoever this person was, they had been hiding in the shadows for nearly a decade, striking only when the snow was thick enough to erase their footprints. The medical examiner's report added another chilling layer. The wounds on the victim's arms were made post-mortem, suggesting the carvings were part of a message rather than torture. DNA testing linked all the remains back to the same unknown male suspect. For the first time, Jonas had proof of a serial killer, one who had turned the wilderness into his hunting ground. The investigation closed in on 2 main suspects: Darren Cole, a respected forest ranger with access to every remote path, and Neil Tarver, a volunteer who had joined every search operation since Evelyn's disappearance. Both men lived on the edge of the woods, both knew the land intimately, and both had spotless reputations. Yet Jonas couldn't ignore the strange unease he felt every time he looked at Darren Cole's calm, composed face. The ranger's knowledge of terrain, his solitary lifestyle, and his quiet presence all fit in neatly. Jonas began to suspect that Darren had been more than just helpful. He might have been orchestrating every search, leading teams away from crucial evidence. The realization made his blood run cold. The killer had not only hidden among them, but had become part of the investigation itself. The hunter and the savior might be the same man. And as snow began to fall once more, Jonas feared that the forest wasn't done revealing its secrets. It was only beginning to expose its darkest one. The investigation into Darren Cole moved quietly at first. Detective Jonas Harker didn't want to alert him until every piece of evidence was secure. The ranger had long been admired by the townspeople, a man who rescued hikers, taught survival courses, and volunteered at every community event. To most, he was the embodiment of trust, but to Jonas, he had become the embodiment of deceit. His years of experience in the wilderness, his precise knowledge of terrain, and his involvement in every missing person's search suddenly painted a different picture. Darren hadn't been helping to find the victims. He had been making sure no one ever found the truth. When police raided his remote outpost in the northern woods, they expected to find tools and maps. What they discovered was something far more sinister. Inside the cabin, the walls were lined with detailed maps of the region, each marked with red circles. Some were labeled with initials that matched the victims' names. There were hidden cameras, rolls of undeveloped film, and plastic containers filled with personal items, jewelry, watches, and clothing belonging to the missing. In a locked trunk, officers found dozens of memory cards. Each contained images of the victims in their final days. Watched from a distance, unaware of the camera's presence, on a dusty shelf, Jonas found a final clue. A folder labeled EM. Inside were photographs of Evelyn Maris at her home, her Jeep, and finally, near the frozen creek. The last image showed her standing beside the water, the figure of a man faintly visible behind her in the reflection of the ice. Jonas knew immediately who it was. The build, the jacket, the posture, it was Darren Cole. But before police could bring him in, Darren vanished. His truck was found abandoned on a forest trail. The driver's door opened just like Evelyn's Jeep had been. A fresh snowstorm rolled in that night, erasing all tracks. Search teams combed the woods for days but found nothing. Then, near the frozen edge of Riverdale Creek, a hiker discovered a body half buried in snow. It was wearing Darren's ranger uniform. His badge, knife, and radio were all still intact. The body's face was unrecognizable due to frostbite, but the coroner concluded it matched Darren's build and height. The town sighed in relief, believing the nightmare was finally over. However, weeks later, forensic results shattered that illusion. The DNA didn't match Darren Cole. The dead man was someone else, an unidentified drifter who had been missing for months. Jonas realized then that Darren had staged his own death. He had escaped into the vastness of the Canadian wilderness, using the storm as cover. The man who knew the forest better than anyone had vanished into it, leaving only a decoy behind. As spring approached, the snow began to melt, revealing traces of new footprints around the old cabin site. Locals whispered about seeing someone standing at the edge of the trees at dusk, tall and still. Watching the town from afar, Jonas visited Riverdale Creek one last time, standing where Evelyn's Jeep had once been found. The forest was quiet, but the silence felt wrong, alive, almost aware of his presence. He knew Darren Cole was still out there, surviving off the land, waiting for the world to forget him. The case was officially closed, marked as resolved with suspect deceased, but Jonas never believed that. Every time a new traveler went missing in the northern woods, he was reminded that evil doesn't die easily. It simply adapts, hides, and watches. Somewhere among the endless pines of Canada, Darren Cole was still hunting, patient as ever, blending into the wilderness that had become both his home and his weapon. The mystery of Riverdale Creek was far from over.